Good morning again. I'm Gary Viadovich, and as Kara said, I have spent about 33 years on the government side, throughout it doing acquisition procurements of various kind and monitoring contractor performance, running projects and programs. I was with the Air Force for 20 years and retired, and then my good friends at NASA contacted me, and I had an opportunity to work at NASA at Kennedy Space Center for about 14 years. I also spent some time supporting the Army and the intelligence community, and have a little bit of experience in a couple of other agencies that are out there. And what you're about to see with a gazillion PowerPoint slides, I'm afraid, are my collective thoughts and suggestions and recommendations coming from someone who has been on the other side of the fence reviewing and evaluating proposals. I have not written them myself, but I have seen many, and I have reviewed them, scored them. I've led source selection boards and written the solicitations and the RFPs.
That's okay.
And statement of works. Do we have a microphone issue out there? I hope not. Okay. So with that brief introduction of me, I will dive right into it. So essential truths, that's why we're all here. There are more losers than winners. Now, clearly there's things out there that are beyond our ability to control. And there's cost aspects and all of that. Many contracts simply come down to the lowest bidder. The government provides an opportunity. Nope. Again, do we have everyone muted? I hope. Okay.
Work on that, Gary.
Okay. But the government has an opportunity to award contracts, not based strictly on who the low bidder is. And that's called the best value type of contract award. And in those cases, the government has determined that cost is one factor of many. And there can be times when the government values certain aspects of performance or timely delivery or something like that more important than cost. And in those cases, proposals can be basically eliminated from the competition even before cost has been brought into the picture, even before cost has been considered. And in those cases, like it says in that bottom statement, the proposals have basically lost only because of the way they were written. Were they following the instructions? Were they compliant with the instructions? And that's what we're going to address today, those best value type of contract awards and how the contract is written aside from the cost aspect, aside from being the low bidder. How is the proposal written, assembled, and eventually evaluated and scored by the government? Okay, next slide. All right, this is Gary's short list. If I had to come up with my top issues of what sinks some proposals, failure to address all requirements. The RFP will list all the requirements of the contract, and the proposal needs to address every single one of them. Non-compliance with the instructions, we'll talk about that a little bit, but yeah, that would be the kiss of death, and that might even get you eliminated even before the proposal is actually evaluated. Unclear to the reader. Wow, sometimes we think of the government as being this huge, faceless bureaucracy, and it is, right? But please keep in mind that at the receiving end, there's a human being, and your proposal is going to end up in the hands of a human being who has all the human frailties and all of that we all have. And it has to be easy to be understood. It has to be something someone can read and understand. And whether it's because of wordiness or the way it's assembled and hard to follow and poor grammar, that all gets in the way of a human being being able to score it accurately. And then insufficient substantiating information, we'll talk about this, this is quite common in proposals where the offeror simply reiterates the requirements right back to the government, right back to the people who wrote it. And what they're really looking for is the details and how are you going to do it and what are the risks and all of that substantiating information. Okay, next slide. And there are some winners out there. The proposal needs to answer the solicitation. It needs to be tailored specifically for that RFP. It needs to be tailored exactly for that specific government office and their specific problem that they're trying to address. And a key word is convincing, right? That human being on the other side has to be convinced that you're offering not only a good solution, but a better solution than your competitors. And the best way to do that is stick to the facts, include facts, not a lot of, well, I say at the bottom, those kind of sweeping, grandiose claims, but not a lot of claims that can't be substantiated with hard facts. Relevant examples, I'll talk about that a little later. The key is relevant and how your past performance specifically relates to this specific contract award. Showing the bidder's experience and capabilities. It's one thing to claim that you can do work and claim that you can get the job done, but there has to be an element where your own experience or something you have demonstrated convinces the reader that it's not just talk and fluff. Okay, next. Again, convincing the evaluator. Do you understand the problem? When the government evaluators are given their instructions for scoring proposals, the number one rule that they are all given is, does the offeror clearly understand the requirements of the RFP? Do they understand the problem? So you have to convey to the reader a thorough understanding of a problem. And the best way is, again, in details. In details. I can ask, the contract is to abate asbestos from my ceiling. Okay, and a number of people could come back and say, yeah, we can abate asbestos from the ceiling. All right, now convince me that you really understand it. How are you going to do it? What are the risks? What are the issues? What can possibly go wrong? And do you have a mitigation plan that can make all those risks go away? Right? In the details is how you convince the evaluator that you really have a good handle on what it is that we're talking about. That you can solve the problem. You've got experience doing this. Maybe you don't have experience doing this exact same thing, but you have other experiences that you can draw upon that can convince the evaluator that the risk is low with going with you and that you can deliver, right? You have a good track record, you've got good history, you've got good qualifications, and there's no concern on the side of the government that awarding to you is going to end up being an incomplete task that they'll have to terminate or some other nightmare situation, that you can simply get through the contract requirements and deliver on time, on cost, all of that. Okay, next. So it's not all about me, right? It's not about, here I am, here's my company, here's how great I am. here's what we do, all of that. It's about we. It's about working together with that government office as a team. And it's about their needs and their problems. Remember a problem solution aspect. They've got a problem, they need a solution. It's about, okay, here is how we think we can come to your aid, how we can satisfy your problem and your needs. And part of that may be knowing more about what are the needs of that agency or that office. The RFP is going to be very limited to the needs of that contract award, but by doing some exploration through the internet and other sources, you can learn a lot more about those agencies. Like here's a sample page from Homeland Security. It talks about what are their goals, right? What are their goals? What's their mission? What's their vision? What are they planning to do for the next year? What does their budget look like? And how does this contract fit in with other things that are going on in that organization? Being able to convey to the reader that you understand their situation, you understand their budget constraints, and perhaps understand how this specific contract fits into perhaps a myriad of other contracts that are all going on at the same time, and how they need to interface and play together in order to support the agency's goals or vision. Okay. All right, so what is a proposal? Just running down my list. Yes, it's a good idea, solving a problem, etc. That's just kind of your dictionary definition. It's a marketing document, right? Just like whether it be a business card, whether it be a website, whatever marketing tools you may use, this is also a marketing document. It introduces your reader to your company and its capabilities. It's also a reflection of your company, right? It needs, so yeah, it needs to be polished. It needs to look good. It needs to be thorough. It should not reflect any sort of sloppiness, right? Legal and binding. There are certain situations where, you know, if you hopefully win the contract, that if there's any ambiguities in the contract language or something like that, they may blow the dust off an old proposal and go look at it. And sure enough, it says right here that you will do this, and it's, you bet, it's legal and binding. In many cases, the government will actually incorporate the proposal as part of the contract. That doesn't always happen, but it does sometimes. But write it and be ready to absolutely stand behind it on a legal basis. A companion to the solicitation, again, the proposal needs to be tailored to that specific solicitation. It should not look like, well, this is the proposal that we always issue to all similar, you know, requests. It should be tailored explicitly for that office and their needs. Remember the problem solution. They have a specific problem, and even though elsewhere in the government they may have the exact same problem and the exact same needs, that office approaches this contract as if they are very unique, that they have this problem uniquely to themselves, and they're looking for a solution that addresses their unique situation. Communication process. So those English courses we took in high school and elsewhere all come into play. You know, not burying the facts, writing clearly, correct structure of a paragraph, you know, correct use of the semicolon and hyphenation and all of those rules, they all come into play. And then a relationship building exercise. Right, I think of the, you know, if you're familiar with the old film Casablanca, and at the very end, Humphrey Bogart's walking off into the fog and he says, this could be the start of a beautiful friendship. So think about that. The proposal shouldn't leave the reviewer with a feeling of, man, I hope they're not the low bidder. It should leave them with a feeling of, man, I want to do business with these folks. They get it. They understand me. They're on the ball. They can follow directions. They can turn out a good piece of work. I want to do business with them. I need them on my team, right? And it's the start of a good relationship to follow. Okay, next. Again, there's that word convince. It's got to convince the evaluator that you understand the requirements. Details. Details. Go beyond what they tell you. I need my transmission replaced. All right. Hopefully I'm dealing with someone who can tell me all the ins and outs of that transmission and give me confidence that they know what they're talking about. Tell me about the doomajiggy fitting into the what is it and what are the risks, so that I believe that they really have a handle on doing my transmission. Address all the requirements. Again, they will explicitly say, here are all our requirements, and you have to address each one. Don't leave anything to chance. And of course, be clear and easy to follow for the reader. 5 C's: clear, complete, comprehensive, concise, convincing. Maybe I'll throw a 6th one, and confident, right? I like them to ring with confidence. We can do this. We know this. This is our bread and butter. That kind of a flavor to it. Okay, next. So what is their process on the side of the government? Here's just kind of a quick list of what the government is required to do, right? They have to tell you what you're going to, they have to tell you what they're going to do, and then they have to do what they said, right? So as you go through that RFP or that solicitation, that's what they're doing. They're telling you how they're going to award this contract, what criteria they're going to use. And of course, when they get into that evaluation, they have to do that. And when they come to the evaluation, they will give the individuals the exact same words and language that was in the solicitation. Eliminate unfair advantages. The key word here is unfair. Are there going to be advantages amongst competitors? Yes, there will be. Especially in the situation where it is like a contract that's up for renewal and a recompetition. Does the incumbent have an advantage on the competition? Typically, yes, they do. They've been in that position. They've done the work for that office. They're familiar with the people. They know their phone numbers. They probably know the names of their children and when their birthdays are and all of that. Do they have an advantage over the rest of the competition? Probably. Is it an unfair advantage? No, that's a fact of life. When you have a recompete situation, then having an incumbent is a fact of life. So when we talk about leveling the playing field, recognize that maybe it's not always as level as we want it to be, but it's not unfair. And speaking of a contract where you may, it may be up for a recompetition, don't lose sight of the fact that sometimes in those situations, the government is specifically looking for someone new to bring on board, someone new to do this. They don't like the old ways. That happens. Suit the government's best interest. The contracting officer is always looking for the government's best interest. And stay, IEWFAR, they like to use TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, in accordance with federal acquisition. The FAR is the rules and regulations all government agencies follow when they buy anything from pencils and papers to tanks and jets. And that is all available online. You can just go to www.acquisition.gov and there it is. I never recommend that someone try to become a FAR expert, but I do recommend that you take a look at it if you haven't done so, and at least understand how it's assembled. At least understand that there's different parts and paragraphs that apply to different types of acquisition. Because in the solicitation, you'll see things like FAR 15.202 applies, right? and you should be able to know, okay, I understand where to find that. I don't have to have it memorized or anything like that, but I do know that if it says, hey, FAR Part 15 or FAR Part 12 or FAR Part whatever, you can go look for it, you can read it, you can understand, okay, here's how the government is going to use or follow these FAR rules in order to do this acquisition. And of course, the FAR is out there. In addition to that, every agency, well, I don't know about every agency or office or department, they'll have their own supplement rules to the FAR. So the Department of Defense has a DoD FAR SUP, and NASA has a FAR SUP, and Department of Transportation and Health and Human Services all have FAR supplements. So depending on what agency or office you happen to be dealing with, you might look and see if they have a FAR SUP where they're citing rules that they're going to apply and follow as well. And that's also at that same website. Okay, next. All right, the process. So if you had an opportunity to sit in on an earlier webinar from Steve South, he talked a lot about the proposal planning process and how the planning phase really can just go on and on and on. Many more established companies who have been doing this for a while, they've got their capture teams, and they've got their research teams and their proposal planning teams, and they are watching for existing contracts to expire and come up for renewal, and they're doing all that advanced planning. And that can, as much effort as people want to put into that is all part of that proposal planning, as well as just having a good handle on what kind of an office am I looking to support? What is my best fit out there? And when I pull together my proposal, who's actually going to do the writing? And if you're a small business, maybe you're doing it all yourself. But who is going to do your editing or your reviewing, and have all of that ironed out in advance? Because when the final solicitation is released, a 30-day response is not unusual. And pulling it all together in 30 days is a lot. And that's got to include whatever time you need to do the review and the validation and all the checks. And if you're going to use something like a red team where you have an independent set of eyes come in and start to pick it apart, you have to leave time for that. And if they want hard copies delivered, you have to have time for printing and distribution and mailing and all of that. So 30 days is a very short fuse. So as much in advance work that you can do is to your benefit. Okay, next. And where do you find it? Well, it used to be called FedBizOps was the website. Was the government point of entry for all acquisitions, and everything would be posted on that. That is transitioning over to betasam.gov. And I don't know, I'm resistant to change myself. I don't think it is as user-friendly as the earlier one, but maybe it's just me on a learning curve. But betasam.gov is the new FedBizOps. So all contracting opportunities are posted there. And again, I recommend, if you haven't, go ahead and go on there and play on there and navigate yourself around and see how you can look for specific agencies or offices or timeframes or specific codes that you're searching for. But everything is on that site. In addition, perhaps a more streamlined approach is the individual agencies or the individual departments may have their own, if you go to their website, a drop-down menu part that says doing business with us, or that type of logo where you can click on and it'll take you perhaps to their contracting office. And they may advertise upcoming business opportunities and contracting opportunities. They may have a small business office specifically for encouraging and working with small businesses. If you're a military installation nearby, they probably have a small business office, or as a minimum, a small business representative who you can call and talk to as a human being. You can check their website and just get an awareness of what is coming down the pipeline. The next website there is more for archive data for existing contracts. If you're interested in pouncing on a contract that may be coming up for recompetition. And then through CARES office, the PTAC office, they have a situation called their bid match system, where if you're registered and you've signed up with them on your capabilities and what your company's performance is, and they have on their radar what opportunities are from the government, they can try to match you up and say, hey, have you heard of this? You probably need to put together a proposal because this is right up your alley. Okay, next. Okay, just a quick snapshot out of SAM Beta Gov, like it says at the top of the page. Again, this used to be FedBizOps for those of you who have been around. I think they started the migration about 2 years ago. But again, you know, hey, vessel chartered to support ocean observing cruises. So, man, if you got a boat, maybe this is up your alley. But everything is out there. In fact, it's sometimes just fun to go look and see what's out there, because the government buys all kinds of things, all kinds of services that they don't have in-house. And you can look it up by, again, the department or the office or the agency. You can look it up by location. Maybe you're limited to the state of Florida or something like that. But you can, it's a powerful search engine. Again, I just recommend that people get comfortable with how it works and how it operates. Okay, next. When you find an opportunity, FedBizOps or whatnot, it'll have just this basic data, a solicitation number, which will follow it through the life of that contract process. And you can even search by that number and say, hey, what's the status of that? Have there been updates? Have there been, or maybe it was withheld and they didn't go to contract, but what's the story? And just search by that solicitation number. The due date, that's important, of course. And you can find and dig out and download the synopsis or the solicitation, what agency, and the contracting officer. Usually there's an email address, maybe a name and a phone number. But how do you contact the contracting officer? Once you get into the acquisition, that contracting officer becomes the recipient of questions and other type of communication, even the final delivery of the proposal. So that person, that email, that phone number is very important. They'll also identify if it's a is this a set aside? Is this specifically for small businesses or small disadvantaged businesses or something of that nature? Hub zone, and opportunities for partnering. So for new companies, for startups, you know, especially as we talk about things like past performance and being able to show a good track record. If you're a new company, perhaps you know, being a prime contractor or the single awardee here is not the best start, and maybe partnering with a more established company is a better way to go. And through that website, there will be, you can click and find that you can just simply sign up for opportunities in partnering, opportunities in subcontracting, and the government will have small business goals. Even if it's a large contract that's going to one of the, you know, the huge companies, probably, they will also levy on them these small business goals that perhaps say, hey, 10% of this contract value or 20% or some percentage of the contract value needs to go to small businesses or small disadvantaged businesses. So if I'm the Northrops or the Lockheeds or the Boeings or whoever else who is out there, they may be looking for who are these small businesses that I can partner in and I can subcontract with, and I can show the government that I'm meeting their small business goals. Okay. All right, when you go search for opportunities, you'll see a lot of, again, acronyms out there. IFB is an invitation for bids. This is related to contract awards, that, again, based solely on low bid and cost. So for what we call a sealed bid award, where the companies submit a proposal, here's my price and some other things that perhaps are asked for. There's a public opening on a designated date. The low bid is reviewed, but typically the low bid simply receives the contract award. Very simple, very straightforward. Again, the government is concerned only with price and awarding to the low bidder at that time. An RFQ is is like that, but it's a little bit of a best value consideration as well. The government is solicitation for quotations. Perhaps they're not ready to go buy right now, but they're building their database of companies that can provide those goods and services. So you're responding to a proposal with your pricing. Again, they may have some best value considerations such as timely delivery and whatnot, but they will go through all that. At the end of it, there may not be a contract award, but it may be something that they can go to in the future when they need, they have a sudden need for, buying forehead thermometer scanners. And so they pick up the phone and, okay, I have your quote right here. Here's your price. Here's your delivery. We're ready to pull the trigger and go forward. And then the RFP is generally the most comprehensive of them. That goes with what we call those best value awards, comprehensive, and an opportunity to negotiate that final cost before the contract is signed. Okay, next. And before we go any deeper into RFPs and best value awards, let me just hit on a couple of other things that you may see out there. Something called sources sought. The government recognizes that they may not have all the expertise and the smarts of all these, especially when you get into the IT world or new technologies or new products. And so they may be looking to test the water just to see what's out there and see what's the feasibility of some of these procurement ideas that they're coming up with. And they're just looking for feedback from industry of, are they doing the right thing? Is this a good time to ask for this? Are we asking for something stupid? Is there perhaps only one supplier out there of the service? Or is there a need for a true competition? Are there a number of people who do the same service and we have to go with competition? So I'm biased here from the government side, but I always encourage you, if there's a sources sought for your line of service or product, then giving that feedback to the government is important because they just don't know. They don't have that expertise. An RFI, request for information. I know there was a question in the chat box before we got started about RFIs, and I kind of apologize if I danced around it a little bit, but the question was related really to the level of detail necessary for an RFI. And my fallback answer is always, well, the solicitation should guide you in that, because RFIs are used for a variety of different things. Sometimes they're used along the lines of a sources sought, where they just want to know what's out there and what their next step should be. And sometimes it's used when they are very close to going through a whole RFP process and their procurement is relatively in a mature state. So it should say, okay, what kind of detail are they looking for? The FAR allows for something called an advisory multi-step process. What that means is, and the RFI will be structured specifically in this manner, but you'll turn in something that is very much like a full-up proposal. It'll have detail in it. It probably won't have a cost volume, but it certainly will have more detail than just a sources sought. And the government will review that and give you feedback as to, do they think you're going to be competitive in this? Do they think that when they finally issue a RFP for this, that you have a chance of winning? Because they recognize it takes a lot of time and money and resources for individuals to pull together a proposal. And if from the information you submit in an RFI, if they can already tell that, this really isn't your cup of tea, they'll tell you, and you can make a judgment call. You're certainly not prohibited from competing. You're not prevented in any way from submitting a proposal, and you're not eliminated from the competition. This is simply their opinion of your competitiveness. All right. Again, not all RFIs are structured that way. They can be very much like a sources sought, very high level of information. The solicitation should guide you in that. And when in doubt, contact the contracting officer and ease your mind to say, hey, I really don't understand what your purpose is in this. Are you about to go to procurement? Are you about to issue a solicitation? Or are you just trying to get information for something 5 years down the road, right? And a notice of intent, if they're about to award a contract, especially without competition, a sole source award, the government has to have a justification for why they do not do competition in those situations, but they have to publish that they're about to award a contract. And, hey, if somebody's out there and they say, wait a second, why did you sole source that? They have an opportunity to raise their hand and say, hey, wait a second, you should have competed this. Okay, next. And there's different types of awards. The government wants competition. The government likes it because not only does it keep prices low, it also keeps industry sharp. And so everything should be full and open competition. And as I said on the last chart, if they go another route and do a sole source directly to one supplier without competition, then they need an internal justification and a review of that justification and an approval in a very complicated approach, but they have to get approval before they do something other than full and open competition. Sealed bid, as I mentioned, that's the type of contract that just simply goes to the low bidder. The contracting officer will do a little investigation to make sure that the prices are reasonable and that the company is in good standing and they're not, they haven't been barred from government contracting opportunities. And then there's best value. And we'll talk about two types of best value, two-step and a trade-off. Okay, next. So here's our government contracting 101 class. You'll come across a term called the best value continuum. So if you can imagine this block here as a continuum going from left to right as to how important is cost to the government. How important is cost to the government? So if I look on the left side, that's where cost is the most important. It is the most important. So it's not a really technical, not a real sophisticated project. It's very straightforward. Many contractors can do this, so I can do it via sealed bid, right? I just want to open it up. Whoever's the low bidder, you get the award, go forth and do. And then as I move to the right of this chart on the far right, that's where I have other factors which are more important than cost. I get to an extreme situation where the government may say, I don't care what it costs, I need it done. I need it done right now. This is urgent, and I'm going to award to the highest technical capability contractor. regardless of cost. All right, those are extreme situations. However, right now, the government is in a national emergency situation. And I bet that there are a number of situations going on right now where they are approaching contracts in that method. Sometimes you come across that as a result of a national disaster or something like that. But there are rare opportunities where the government awards, it doesn't matter your price, as long as you can do it and get it done quickly and you have good past performance and you're reliable and low risk, that's what they're looking for. And then in the middle is all this trade-off where, yeah, the non-cost factors are important, but we got to keep a good eye on cost, and we're willing to make some trades to get to the best value. Kind of in the middle there is a hybrid that is called the two-step process. And if we go to the next chart, I'll talk about that. Okay, two-step. There's also a term out there called lowest price technically acceptable, LPTA. The FAR has them actually located in different sections, but for the purpose of our discussion here, we'll consider them the same. And all this really means is that it's a low bid award. Cost is very important, but there are some technical aspects of the work that are driving the government to say, whoa, I don't want to give this to Bill and Ted's Screen and Door Company if they're the low bidder. I want to give it to someone who knows really the technical aspects we're talking about, and then I'll give it to the low bidder out of that pool. So what they do, and this is my cartoon at the bottom of the chart, I have a pool of bidders out there, and then I run them through some type of qualification screening. And in my my cartoon, I have this criteria as a filter. And I run them through this kind of pass-fail criteria. And now I have fewer but qualified bidders. And then out of that pool, I just give it to the low bidder at that point. So it's a two-step. I verify that they meet the criteria, and then it's a low bid award at that point. Okay, next. Okay, here's the key to these two steps. If you happen to be looking at a solicitation built like that, make sure you identify clearly and understand clearly what that criteria is. Again, this is to filter out non-qualified bidders. So it is not something that is evaluated and rated, and they say, oh, on a scale from 1 to 10, you get a 5 or a 6. This is pass, fail. You either do it or you do not, right? There's no in between. So not only must you pass each criteria, again, there's a human being on the other end of this. Make sure that the reader absolutely positively knows that you pass it, right? And unfortunately, I had an opportunity to work with a gentleman once who was doing this sort of a thing, and I just said, even after reading through his 15 pages of proposal, I couldn't tell if he passed the criteria. So whatever method you choose to use, it has to be clear to the reader. I recommend, I have a checklist mentality. Go ahead and include a checklist. Here's the criteria right out of your RFP. Have a, whatever it may read, have an office within 50 miles of the work site. Maybe a big check mark or a big yes, see page 3. And then I go to page 3 and there, hey, here is our office, here is the work site, Google map, whatever. And it shows that I'm within the distance required or whatever. But tackle each criteria thoroughly so that the reader has no doubt in their mind that you pass every single one. Okay, next. Okay, then we get to what's called the best value trade-off. So this is no longer the two-step approach. This is a cost volume is asked for, but also a technical volume. And in addition to price, they're going to base it on all of the different details that you submit in your proposal. Who's doing it? What do you know? What's your background? When are you going to do it? Where do you do it? How do you do it? In addition to how much, right? Cost is always a factor. Cost is a factor here, and it may not even be the most important one, right? And again, I can't emphasize enough, they're looking for the detail to discriminate between offerers, right? Yeah, let's just go on. Okay, yeah, award not based primarily on cost. Cost is always a factor, but it might not be the most important. Non-cost areas could be far more significant in the evaluation. And because of this, even though they've said from the get-go, this is best value, we're not awarding based on cost and all of that, it is extremely difficult for the government to award a contract to someone who is not the low bidder, because it almost invites a protest. It's tough. And so because of that, they need to put together a really bulletproof evaluation. They need to be complete and thorough, because it's going to have to stand up to the scrutiny of not only the whole public, but also to the contractor who may have been the low bidder who didn't get the award and wants to know why, right? There's a transparency aspect here. So therefore, the government wants to be thorough. And I tell people who are working these best value proposals, be prepared for the evaluator to look through every paragraph, every sentence, right? I have been in rooms where the evaluation team has argued over the actual word choice that was used by the offerer, right? They want to be thorough and ironclad that can withstand any sort of scrutiny, because it's difficult to award to somebody who is not the low bidder. Okay, next. Okay, so the proposal itself, where do we start? My fallback is always the solicitation. That should be the roadmap. Read it, understand it. Do you know what's being asked for? What kind of an acquisition method are they using? How are they going to decide who the winner is? That is included in there. Remember that list I gave you earlier of what the government process is? They're going to tell you what they're going to do. They're going to tell you what is their method of determining who the winner is. A cross-reference matrix, again, I'm kind of a checklist person. So as you go through and you come across those requirements, document them in some sort of a matrix or a checklist so that you can keep track and make sure that you are addressing every single one. And note that there can be information throughout the RFP. It's going to come in different sections. It's all in there, okay? It just might be scattered. In my experience working with different agencies and different offices, sometimes there's not a huge amount of standardization where there could be. Different agencies I've seen have put, documents assembled slightly differently, but that's okay. Within the RFP, everything you need should be there. Okay, next. So within the RFP is the statement of work. That's the exact description of the contract performance requirements. Sometimes you'll see what's called a performance work statement. That's written more for the end result or the outcome, and not so much of the how you got there and how you ended up delivering that product. Whereas a typical statement of work is written more step by step by step by step, how to get there. A statement of objectives is, more again like that first one, more written towards the outcome, the result. But all of those will have, again, the details of what are the individual performance requirements for this specific contract. And then also within the RFP, what are the requirements to even be considered to receive this contract award? That's called being a responsive bidder. What are the requirements to be a responsive bidder? And this can be everything from, is your company in good standing financially? What's your past performance record? But it also includes all those nitty-gritty format requirements or delivery requirements of the proposal. Again, they're trying to level the playing field as best as they can. And so that's all in what we'll talk about, section L. Those are the requirements for being a responsive bidder, where you're even eligible for consideration. And then next would be, again, the government is required to tell you what they're going to do. So section M of the RFP is where they document exactly how is that award decision going to be made. Is it a two-step process, as we talked about, or is it going to be based on all this criteria and factors and sub-factors? That's in that part of the RFP. Next. All right, the next couple of slides are just kind of a alphabet soup of how an RFP is typically assembled. Section A is usually just a form on the front that describes the solicitation, a due date, and who the contracting officer is. And then you can go through the alphabet. And again, sometimes there's a little bit of variety between different agencies, but they all try to follow this exact format. Okay, next. Section I, section J, K. And then you get to section L and section M. I put a little exclamation point on those. Those are the instructions for the offers. And section M, again, what's the evaluation method and description? Best value, low bidder. What's the basis for that award? Okay, next. So for example, here's one out of an RFP. At the very, very top, evaluation criteria, M3. So, hey, we're in section M. Basis for contract award. This source selection is a best value source selection. Right up top, right in the front, first sentence, I love it. This is best value, no mistake. And then there's a lot of description as to, really what are some of the areas of evaluation, whether it be mission capability, past performance, and they tell you to be eligible for the award, you have to be in accordance with the FAR, blah, 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 blah. And it's just, it may be buried in there a little bit, but it describes their award process. Okay, next. Here's another one, basis for contract award. Contractor will select the best overall proposal based on evaluation of various factors, sub-factors defined, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The term best value doesn't even show up until like the very, very last sentence, almost the last words of the last sentence to represent the best value to the government. So they're not all written the exact same way. Remember, again, we're talking about the human beings on the other side of the fence here, and some are better writers than others. And so some of the information is buried in there, unfortunately, but it is in there. Again, it doesn't always jump out at you. It takes reading and rereading a couple of times. Okay, next. All right, and again, human beings are the ones writing and issuing these RFPs. So don't assume that they're error-free. There could be mistakes in there that they didn't catch. The government team that issued this might not be the same team that has the need, right? There could be an office in the government who actually is the user of the product or the need or has the need for the service, and they've tried their best to document that, and then they may send it over to the contracts office. So the people who are writing that RFP may not be the ones who have the most knowledge and the firsthand experience about the work. And so that comes down to, hey, if there's anything that you don't understand, I always recommend asking, right? There'll be a website or there'll be just email opportunities. Some people don't like to ask questions because they do become public record, and all your competitors will see the questions and the answers. But I think it's far more important that you understand what it is that's in the RFP. And again, there could be a mistake that needs correction, but most important, you need to understand what they're looking for, what they're asking for. Okay. All right, so if you've decided to go for it, set up a timeline, because that due date is so important. And then again, like we talked about on that schedule process slide, be able to leave yourself enough time for review and for distribution and for red team review and printing and whatever else may be necessary, in addition to all the critical dates that the government may set. There may be a cutoff date for asking questions. There may be an industry day or site visit day or a project lockdown date, and fit all that together. Again, I advocate a requirements matrix so that you don't let anything slip through the crack. And then I'll talk in a little bit about building the first shell. And again, make sure that we understand exactly how this decision is going to be made, the Section M award criteria. Okay, next. So, evaluation criteria, Section M, here we are. Cost is always a consideration, but again, under best value, it may not be the most important factor. It may be one of many factors, all right? So there's a technical section, and sometimes the nomenclature gets a little bit confusing. Sometimes technical simply means non-cost. Sometimes it's more of, where I think technical really means is, you know, the nuts and bolts and the more intricacies of the project or the work itself. And then there could be a management section, a personnel section. Past performance and small business are also mandated by the FAR, that there will be consideration of those areas. Those can be waived by the contracting officer if situation dictates. If it's a set aside and they're looking for perhaps a small business, a startup business, maybe they might waive past performance. Or if they're looking for a small business, then there may not be a small business section other than to verify that you are indeed a small business. And then Section M will talk about something called relative importance, and we'll dive into that here. Go ahead. So that technical or that non-cost area has got to answer the who, what, where, when, why, how, all of that type of thing, in addition to how much. How are you going to do this, and what are the risks, right? I need asbestos abated from my building. And again, we talked how simply reiterating that, you know, abating the asbestos simply reiterates the requirement back to the government, doesn't do you any good. And what they want to know is who's going to do it? What are their qualifications? What are they certified? How is it going to be done? What, as perhaps the building owner, do they need to be aware of? Can I keep the building occupied? Do I have to vacate the building? Are you going to do it after hours and on weekends? And what about my security? And what can possibly go wrong? What if you're not able to reach all the, you know, the areas? And so what are the risks? How are you going to mitigate them? How are you going to ensure success for this project? And that is in the details of your proposal. Okay, next. A management section or a personnel section, again, depends on what exactly the RFP says, but they may be looking for a discussion of how are you going to manage the overall project, or maybe you're going to have subcontractors or vendors or suppliers. How are you going to manage their aspects of the project too? How are you going to ensure quality into performance? And it may ask for an organization chart. It may ask for position descriptions or resumes. Again, always tailor what you put in explicitly for this contract. Okay, next. And past performance. Again, they will ask for past performance. And when you reply, make sure you know what they're asking for. They're looking for relevant past performance. And it may be explicitly spelled out in the RFP what they mean by relevance, but perhaps you might have to lead the reader down the path. Take them by the hand, lead them down the path. What is relevant to you may not be relevant to the reader. Perhaps we're just talking about, not the exact service, but maybe it's very similar. And maybe the location, maybe the fact that you've done work on a military installation is relevant. And you know how difficult it is to, have your chief engineer get past the drug dogs at the main gate, or you know what happens when you're caught talking on your cell phone on, driving on a military installation, right? Or location. Have you worked outside in the summer months in Florida, for example, and you know what it means when there's an inbound hurricane and you have to secure the work site and all that. Or maybe it's constraints. Maybe you've been in a situation where it's been very, very tight schedule constraints. So again, relevance, if it's not clearly specified in the RFP, you may have to lead the reader down why this specific past performance is relevant to this specific task. And hopefully it's been successful performance, and it should also complement the other areas of the proposal. So in the proposal, if I'm reading that, we understand how these widgets work and how they're assembled because we've done it on such and such project, it would be nice in the past performance section if there was more details about that exact reference. Okay. And then, of course, it goes without saying, be truthful. The government has access to other contracting officers. They can contact people who have worked on other contracts. There's a database that the government keeps for contract performance. So hopefully that all tells a good, same, successful story. Okay. Okay, relative importance. All those different factors that the government will use to evaluate your proposal are not considered as important as each other, right? Some are far more important, some are very, not in that same category. And so in Section M, the government is not required to tell you all their explicit weights or their methodology for scoring, but they are required to tell you what is more important than the other ones, right? So let me give you some examples. And first, before we go too far, go ahead, change the slide. I like to draw it out in pictures. So the terminology may change from, agency to agency, but in general, think of an hierarchy where the area may be a cost and a non-cost area. And within that is your technical volume. And then within that may be engineering services, for example. And you have these factors and sub-factors in different tiers of an hierarchy. And this is just how to imagine it and draw it out when you read it. So if you go to the next page. So here's one right out of, again, here's Section M, relative importance. The relative importance of each factor and sub-factor is as follows. Mission capability, proposal risk, past performance are of equal importance. A little bit on cost and price, and then they talk about the factors and sub-factors and which are more important than the other and which are equal, right? So if you go to the next slide, what I tried to do is take these words and draw a picture because it just helps me understand. So I have the factors, and they said all the factors are equal. Mission capability, risk, and past performance are all equal. And then within mission capability, there's 4 sub-factors. And they said subfactor 2 and 4 are equal, and they're the greatest in importance. 1 and 3 are equal to each other, and they're less important than 2 and 4. So what I do is I try to just, you don't have to be accurate, because first of all, you're never going to know what the real answer is. They don't have to tell you, but I just try to put some math on here where it works. So I show that 1/3 of them, 1/3 of the award is based on those 3 factors. They said they were all equal. But as I got to those subfactors, again, subfactors 2 and 4 are equal and more important than 1 and 3. So I just put 30%, and it could be 35 and 15%. Who knows what the actual numbers are, but these numbers give me some sort of understanding. And then I use this when I'm assembling the details. How much detail and how many pages do they really need to make their decision? So if I go to program management, if I'm writing the program management, the program control section, and I have a 30-page maximum proposal limit, and I'm on 6 or 7 pages of it, I'm probably giving them more detail than they're looking for. 20% of the 1/3 of a 30-page proposal is only like 2 pages or 3 pages at best. All right, so it just kind of guides you how much detail. Okay, next. And again, it gets confusing. Here's another example. Within the technical area, factors T1 and T2 are equal in importance. T3 and T4 are equal. T1 and T2 are each more important than either T3 or T4, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It gets confusing. Again, you'll never know if you're accurate, but go ahead and work some math to give yourself some guidance as to how the government's going to treat these various factors. Okay, next. Okay, no cookie cutter, but I'd like to talk about what we call the annotated outline. Go ahead. And some people just get so frustrated staring at a blank computer screen. So here's just a method of getting away from a blank screen, right? It's the first step. And all you do, take the solicitation. I always say start with the solicitation and the statement of work, and go, you just cut and paste from what they've issued, and just reiterate. I know I said don't just reiterate the requirement, but in this case, reiterate the requirement right back. The contractor shall provide a seagoing vessel. We will provide a seagoing vessel. The contractor shall provide accommodations for 12 individuals. So you write, we will provide accommodations for 12, and just reiterate the requirement right back. And then delete the original text. So what you're left with is, we will provide an ocean-going vessel, we will provide accommodations for 12 people, whatever. And what you have is a very, very basic outline that, number one, captures all the requirements in the statement of work, and number two, is consistent with the format of the solicitation. Their section 3 is my section 3. Their section 4 is my section, right? It's in the same order as the RFP, and that conveys to the reader that I've read the RFP and that I have a good handle on it. Okay, next. And then just start embellishing, right? This is the rough draft brainstorming on every single requirement, who, what, where, when, how, why, right? Just embellish it and just load it up. And then as a guide, we use that relative importance that we talked about, the overall page allotments to guide us how much level of detail they need for each area, for each factor or subfactor. And it's starting to take shape. Again, this is very basic, very elementary, just a start to get us past a blank computer screen. It captures every requirement, and it is in their same form. Okay, and then we get into the writing. Writing, of course, is an art. Get to the point, be accurate. You can read all this. Again, don't be ambiguous, be direct, be clear, make sure the reader can understand it. And that last bullet, don't lose sight of the evaluation criteria. Section M tells you how they're going to make the decision. If it's not part of the criteria, you probably don't need it in there. Go ahead. Which brings us to flow and traceability, right? Every statement should be traceable to a requirement or flow to a result. Ask yourself as you go through your proposal, why is this statement in my proposal? Because the evaluator is going to be asking that exact same question, and they're probably going to say, so what? And who cares, right? So next. So here's just some common statements or common areas that people discuss. And again, if they're not part of the evaluation criteria, or if they don't clearly convey a benefit back to the government, then we need to ask, so what and who cares? So you might have to say, okay, you know, how many locations I have, maybe they don't care, but I have 6 locations, and that is a benefit to the government because that gives me the ability to, you know, be far more responsive or something like that, you know. And who is my founder? Who cares? Unless the founder, you know, wrote the book on quality control, and this is our Bible that we give to all of our employees, and we know all about, you know, whatever. You might have to explain why that statement is in your proposal. Again, only if it addresses a requirement or if it provides a benefit. Otherwise, they'll say, so what? Okay, next. Same thing of these sort of buzz phrases, great reputation, premier. What does that mean? Substantiate that statement, right? Uniquely qualified, right? What's the joke? You're unique, just like everybody else, right? Says it means nothing to the evaluator. Okay, and remember, there could be 10 proposals. And guess what? Every single one of them is claiming to be uniquely qualified, right? So unless you're able to back these up with facts, these are hollow. Okay, next. Okay, again, I always advocate following the solicitations format because it conveys that you've understood and read through the RFP that they issued out. Include information. Consider the reader's perspective. Again, the reader is the one with the problem. The reader is the one who's looking for a solution. Does your proposal fit into their problem solution scenario? What are they worried about? They're worried about risks. What can go wrong? Address those. And then what are your mitigation steps to make that go away? Let them sleep at night. What are they worried about? Okay, next, please. And tailor. Everything should be tailored explicitly for this office. Don't make it seem like this is the same proposal that was submitted to other offices, even if it was. Tailor it by addressing the specific office, their specific needs. Resumes, if resumes are asked for, tailor it so that it says exactly why this person was chosen to be part of this effort. All right. Professional language, yeah. Repetition, use sparingly, but it's okay for emphasis. And as you're writing, keep an eye on that page count so you don't have last minute panic. Okay, next. And graphics. People like to use pictures. They're great. They break up the narrative. They do take up a lot of space. My advice is anything that's vital to the understanding by the reader, it could be in both text and graphic. Note that what's plain as day to you, the author, may not be to a reader who has never seen that picture before. Even a pie chart or an org chart, that's what captions are for. Captions are kind of a lost art. Captions should steer the reader. Here's exactly what I want you to glean from this picture. Okay? And then the RFP may include a request for, hey, I need an executive summary. I need resumes and some other things. They may even ask for an oral presentation. Let's talk a little bit about oral presentations on the next slide. Sometimes they're used just to go along with a hard copy submittal, but sometimes they're used instead of a written proposal. I think sometimes the government thinks they're easier to evaluate, and I don't think so. My best advice is that an oral proposal is a proposal. So those same rules apply. Clear, concise, convincing, don't bury the facts, be relevant, be clear, have details. The government team will be instructed that, some people just have better presentation skills than others, right? And they'll be instructed, don't let someone's presentation skills get in the way of the technical evaluation. But still, we're all human, and I've seen it happen before where, someone just gets flustered and they don't do so well, and that is a distraction. It's a distraction to the evaluation. And so, again, if you have someone on your team who's great at public speaking, perhaps they should be selected to do this. If not, do what you can to get smart about the actual event, the room layout, what equipment is going to be used, who's going to be in the audience, what do you need to bring with you, what do you need to worry about, do you need to bring spare, drives, are they compatible with, whatever. And go ahead and contact the contracting officer, and they might even allow people to go into that same room ahead of time, and you can practice in that room, in that environment, with that equipment. Because even on the government side, nobody wants someone not to do well simply because of a technical glitch for their presentation skills. And there's no substitute for practicing, right? Okay, next. Okay, at the end of our, we're getting close, we're pulling it all together, we're validating, we're going through our final checks. Does the math add up? Is our format all correct? Does it flow right? Do we want to bring in a red team to review this? Someone who's totally independent of this effort? Again, we're just doing all this check stuff at the end. Did we capture everything? We're getting close. Okay, next. And we might have to do some last minute editing to get us into that, 30-page limit and whatnot. I recommend a maximum minus 10%. So if it's a 30-page limit, 27, 28 pages is probably your good target. And then you have to go look, are graphics really necessary? They take up a lot of room. Could I say the same thing with words and use a lot less space? And look at things like that in order to keep me within that page limit. Page limit panic, you might have to find, eliminate, remove any useless, redundant, and unnecessary words. Okay, next. Okay, editing is an art. Can I get the next slide? Thanks. There you go. Editing is an art. Some people just like to write very verbosely. Never say in 5 words what you can say in 20. So editing is an art, and I encourage you, if you're not skilled at editing, then find someone who is and get rid of those unnecessary words. Okay, next. Because they're a lot easier to read. And get it there on time. Get it there on time. Could be an electronic delivery via email. They might want a hard copy, but make sure that it gets there on time. Okay, next. The definition of on time is in the RFP when it says proposals are due, blah, 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 this time, this date. Anything else is considered late. and it's been looked at many, many times. It is the offeror's responsibility to ensure timely delivery. So if we're talking about hard copies that get delivered to a government installation or military installation, and the government is required to send it to an X-ray facility or something first, or if you're emailing it and it's due at noon and at 11:55 you hit send and you get that signal handshake failed or something like that, it's not on them, it is on the offeror. Okay, next. The GAO has looked at this repeatedly, and you can read some of their statements. It is the offeror's responsibility to ensure timely delivery. Occasional errors in computer systems are a fact of life. So when you hit send at 11:55, whose fault is it? Well, it's your fault for waiting till 11:55. That's how they look at it. And make sure you understand what is the final destination. If it's in any way ambiguous in the RFP, call and ask. Is it on the contracting officer's desk? Is it in their inbox? Or is it simply at the point of entry of the installation? Know exactly where that proposal needs to be at what time. Okay, next. Here's my favorite. The proposal was not received in the email until 3:01, and it was due at 3 o'clock. So 1 minute late, it could not be accepted. This was a $1 billion contract. So it does happen. Okay, next. Okay, let's really quickly, I'll walk you through what happens when the government gets a hold of it. They get it. The first thing they do is they check the clock, they check the timestamp. Did it get here on time? Then they go through all those Section L compliance instructions. Are you compliant with the requirements? Are you considered a responsive bidder? And then it will be divided up and given to evaluation teams. A cost team, they do their own magic, but then there's the non-cost teams. And there's some overlap. Sometimes the same individuals look at different sections, that's fine. But the areas will be looked at specifically by different personnel for different purposes. Technical, past performance, small business, whatever. Okay, next. And then they get, of course, they get isolated and sequestered, and although they do have access to advisors or other past performance sources, they do work in seclusion. Okay, next. So remember that hierarchy we talked about of factors and subfactors. The criteria is way down at the factor and subfactor level. And again, right out of Section M, this is the information that's given to the evaluator. Does the offeror understand the requirement? And the criteria is these subfactors. The contractor shall, blah, 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 blah. And then the burden is on the offeror to convince the evaluator that the requirements are understood and they have a sound approach. Again, once more, substantiating every claim, relevant examples, details. Usually you don't hear anything from the government once they start receiving proposals. However, you might get clarification questions. My advice is if you get a question, make sure you nail it thoroughly. Nail it thoroughly. They're not in the habit of asking a question twice. So when you respond to a question, make sure it's clear and thorough. And hopefully, if they ask anything that even implies that you haven't met a requirement, you want to kill that right away, right? Okay. There was a question out there earlier in the chart. I said, don't use the word client. Again, you're not going to get disqualified or anything by doing that. I just can never think of a good reason for using that word, right? Client to me implies kind of this nameless, faceless person that hired me. Whereas I'm concerned, if I'm the evaluator, I'm concerned about me. I don't care what you do for your other clients. I'm not just another client. I've got a very unique problem, and I'm looking for a teammate to bring a solution to me for my unique problem. Remember, we're unique, just like everybody else. But really, that's what they're thinking. I am very unique here. I don't care about your clients. What are you doing for me? All right. Each proposal is evaluated separately. They are not compared against each other. They are given strengths or weaknesses and probably a risk assessment. They're strong in this area, weak here. Sometimes it's a numerical score. Sometimes it's not. Again, they're not scored relative to each other. They are individually reviewed. And they are reviewed by an individual person, not by a group. They don't read and say, hey, what'd everybody think? They are done by an individual team member. And then they all get together after the fact and reach consensus. And they don't just average, okay, you gave them a 5, you gave them a 7, okay, let's give them a 6. They debate and they'll say, wait a minute, we all looked at exactly the same words. Why did you give them a 5 and you give them a 7? And the person has to defend, sometimes it gets argumentative, but again, they just have to explain what did they read that led them to a 5 and what did they read that led them to another score, and discuss that to reach a score that they all agree on. Again, not scored by comparison, scored by individual team members, and then they get together and they reach consensus. And then when they're done with that offeror's proposal, then they lock that one up and then they pull up the second one and they go through the same process again. Okay, next. And then when they've gone through all proposals like that, then they start looking at comparison amongst offerors. And the only thing they're looking for is consistency. We gave this offer a 4 because they didn't have an office in California. These guys didn't have an office in California either, and they got a 6, right? They're looking for consistency. So they may make some minor adjustments, and then overall, there's another round of consensus. It may take a lot of time and discussion, but they get there. And then they just document everything. Yeah, like you see on this example, everything is scored again. Sometimes it's numerical, sometimes it's not. Everybody gets a score. The offeror names are probably blacked out. Offeror A, offeror B, offeror C, offeror D. And then these are presented to an individual called the Source Selection Authority, the SSA, an individual who has been tasked with making the decision. It is not a recommendation, perhaps. It doesn't have to be in accordance with what the evaluation team recommends. All the data, all the results are presented to the SSA, and the SSA makes a decision. So let's keep going here. In this pretty simplified example, we put everything on a chart, score and cost, and we want high scores, we want low cost, and this is where that trade-off occurs. Am I willing to pay more for a higher score? Again, the final award determination is by that individual who sees all the data. Okay, next. You might hear a term called competitive range. All that means is the government has come up with a short list. They've taken their top contenders and they're going back, and they will tell them, here are all the weaknesses we found in your proposal, and give them an opportunity to fix them and resubmit. So if you're part of the competitive range, congratulations, that's huge. But if they tell you that, hey, we found these weaknesses and they're going to give you an opportunity to fix it and resubmit it, my recommendation is fix it. Don't resubmit it with the same weakness in it. Okay, let me come full circle here. The FAR is very liberal on the contracting officer's requirements to identify who's in that competitive range. They can use a lot of discretion. However, it is clear that they will select the top technical scores. So remember what I said at the very, very start, where offerers lose simply because of how they were written. Okay, in the case I just described with how the FAR says pick your top technical scores, they don't talk about cost. They don't care who the low bidder is. So many offerers are at risk of losing regardless of cost and only because of how it was written technically. How it was written, assuming that they have the ability to perform the job to begin with, of course. But how is it assembled? Was it readable? Did you address all the requirements? Did it make sense? Did it flow nicely? Did it convey the important points to the reader? Did it have detail? Okay, we'll keep going. All right, wrapping up. Don't get discouraged. The government will offer a debrief if you are among the losers, and they will explain where you fell in the scoring compared to the competition, and they'll tell you all the weaknesses and strengths that they found during the evaluation. So take all that information and use it for the next opportunity. And even if you win, get the debrief, because I'm sure they found things that you want to know about. There were probably some weaknesses in, even though it was a winning proposal. Okay, next. And just kind of a quick rundown, right? Have a good understanding of what type of acquisition the government is using. Is it best value? Is there going to be a trade-off of cost and performance? Have a good, clear understanding of Section L, which is the instructions, and Section M, which is how the evaluation is going to be conducted. If there's any uncertainty on your part, go ahead and ask. Don't leave it to chance. Ask and be certain what is being asked for. Right for the reader, put yourself in their position. What are they interested in? What are they worried about? It's not about me, it's about them and their problem and how I want to be part of their team to get them through it. Don't get thrown out. Always ask for a debriefing. There we go. Of other resources that you can look for information. All right, and I think that brings us to the end, unless I missed something. Is that the last slide? Oh, there's me. Yeah, that's my email address. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a note. Also on the Building Better Proposal website, there's an Ask Gary drop down. Feel free to send me a note, ask a question if you have one. I'm on LinkedIn as well. And there's your PTAC team. And with that, thank you again